Wind speeds above 75 miles an hour can flip an empty trailer like a playing card. And yet, in the middle of a hurricane, with sheet metal flying and power lines snapping overhead, most truck drivers refuse to unhook their trailer and just leave it behind. That decision alone has ended careers, and in a few extreme cases, it has ended lives. This is not stubbornness. It is a calculated risk most people outside the industry do not understand, so why would anyone choose to stay hitched to 60,000 pounds of steel in the middle of a hurricane instead of cutting it loose and running? Like this video and subscribe now for more of these kinds of stories, because the real reason behind this decision is more complicated than fear. And here is a real question for the comments. If you were driving through this, would you leave the trailer behind or stay hitched no matter what? Say your honest answer below. That is exactly what we are breaking down today. Most people assume trailers get unhooked simply because they are dangerous in high wind. That part is true, but it is only half the story. An empty trailer is actually more dangerous unhooked than hooked. Without the tractor's weight pulling against it, an empty box trailer becomes an enormous sail sitting on thin tires, and hurricane winds can push it sideways or flip it entirely. Attached to a loaded tractor, that same trailer has far more weight, more ground contact, and a lower center of gravity working against the wind. So here is the question drivers actually face. If unhooking makes the trailer easier for the wind to move, why would anyone assume unhooking is the safe option? It is not, in most cases, and that is exactly why so many drivers stay connected instead of separating from their load. If you have ever driven through severe crosswinds, even without a hurricane involved, drop a comment with the worst wind conditions you have ever pushed through. I want real numbers. There is also a simple physical explanation behind why empty trailers behave so unpredictably. A loaded trailer sits low and heavy, with cargo pressing down against the axles, while an empty trailer rides high and light, closer in behavior to a giant flat sheet standing upright in open air. Engineers sometimes describe this using a basic wind load calculation, where surface area matters far more than most people expect, and an empty trailer presents almost the same surface area as a loaded one while weighing a fraction as much. There is also the cargo itself. Many hurricane zone hauls are not empty runs. They are loaded with fuel, generators, water, and emergency supplies moving ahead of the storm. Abandoning a trailer full of emergency fuel or drinking water on the shoulder of a highway does not just risk company property. It can directly delay relief efforts for people waiting on the other end of that delivery. This is where the real pressure kicks in. Drivers are often caught between two dangers: the storm itself and the responsibility of the load they are carrying. Insurance and liability play a role here too. A trailer left unhooked on a public roadway can be classified as an abandoned hazard, and the driver, not just the company, can be held responsible if it causes a secondary accident once winds pick up. That single detail changes how drivers think about the decision. It is not simply about surviving the storm personally. It is about the legal and financial weight that follows a driver long after the wind dies down. Quick pause. If this kind of real-world trucking decision-making interests you, hit subscribe now so you do not miss the next one, because the next part gets even more intense. Companies have protocols for this, and they are stricter than most people expect. Most carriers require drivers to reach a designated safe stop, a truck stop, a weigh station, or a rest area built to handle high-profile vehicles, rather than parking on an open shoulder. Unhooking is generally treated as a last resort, not a first option. Dispatch and safety teams track storm paths in real time, and drivers are instructed to reroute or delay well before wind speeds become unsafe. The goal is never to be caught making this decision at the last second. By the time winds are strong enough to threaten a rig, the plan should already be in motion. But plans do not always survive contact with a real storm. Routes close without warning. Hurricanes shift direction faster than forecasts predict. And sometimes a driver ends up exactly where no one wanted them to be, hitched to a trailer, watching the sky turn green. In those moments, the decision comes down to physics and training, not panic. Drivers are taught to angle the tractor and trailer into the wind rather than side on, because a shorter wind profile is harder to push over than a broad flat side. Finding solid low ground, away from overpasses, signs, and anything that can become a projectile, matters more than speed. And staying inside the cab, seatbelt on, is almost always safer than stepping outside into flying debris to deal with the trailer at all. Some veteran drivers also watch for a specific warning sign long before the official forecast changes, a sudden drop in ambient pressure that makes their ears pop inside a sealed cab. Many say that small physical cue tells them the real window to reroute is closing faster than any app or radio update suggests. Terrain plays a bigger role in this decision than most people realize. A parking lot surrounded by open fields behaves completely differently from one tucked between buildings or tree lines, which can act as a natural windbreak. Experienced drivers actively scout for this kind of shelter long before a storm arrives, sometimes choosing a slightly less convenient stop simply because the surrounding structures cut wind speed by a noticeable margin. There is also a quieter danger that rarely gets mentioned: decision fatigue. After hours of rerouting, checking weather updates, and talking to dispatch, a tired driver is far more likely to make a rushed call in the final stretch, which is exactly why companies push so hard to lock in a plan long before exhaustion sets in. There is also a training difference between experienced drivers and newer ones that shows up clearly in storm conditions. Veteran drivers tend to make the reroute decision early, sometimes hours before conditions actually turn dangerous, while newer drivers often wait for a visible sign of danger before acting, which shrinks their safety margin considerably. That gap in judgment is exactly why many companies pair newer drivers with experienced mentors during hurricane season, not to check their driving skill, but to check their timing on decisions like this one. Modern fleets have also started leaning on technology to close this gap. Some carriers now equip trucks with real-time wind sensors and automated alerts tied directly to regional storm tracking systems, so a driver gets a warning the moment sustained wind speeds cross a dangerous threshold, rather than relying purely on instinct or a weather app that updates every few hours. Even with this technology, though, the final call still rests with the person behind the wheel, because sensors cannot account for terrain, cargo weight, or how tired a driver actually is after a long shift. There is one more layer to this that rarely makes it into public discussion: the role of dispatch communication during the final hours before landfall. Drivers are typically required to check in far more frequently than usual, sometimes every 30 minutes, so that if a route becomes impassable or a rig gets stuck, the company already knows the exact last known location before contact is lost entirely. So why do drivers still hesitate to unhook, even when instinct says to lighten the load and run? Because in most real scenarios, hitched is safer than unhitched. The cargo often matters to people who are counting on it, and companies have built entire safety systems around avoiding this exact last-second choice in the first place. It is not bravado. It is a chain of decisions made hours before the storm ever arrives, so that by the time the wind is screaming, the only thing left to do is hold the wheel steady and wait it out. If you are an actual driver, hurricane routes, high wind states, anything close to this, what is the worst storm call you have ever had to make on the road? Drop it in the comments. And if you have never driven anything bigger than a car, would you trust yourself to make that decision correctly under pressure? Subscribe if you want more of the real engineering and decision-making behind the world's most extreme jobs.